So I've gotten a few questions about how I made it a all-wheel drive transfer case to my T56. So I'll go into that. Let's check it out. So this is the front half, or the front section of a CTSV T56. The CTSV T56 is kind of a later style T56. They have the triple synchros, or the triple ring synchros. And then they had a remote shifter, which you can see the openings right here. The remote shifter is actually pretty nice for this conversion because it actually has a shifter socket here. It's not installed, but there's a shifter socket that goes on there. If you look up a CTSV T56, it will have a little box right here, which then goes to a remote shifter. So that's actually good for this because you need to shift from this location. Some of the other T56s, they'll have a plate here, but the shifter will be back here, so you'll have some difficulty adapting a shifter to that. So that's a good choice. The only drawback for the CTSV T56 is this bell housing adapter is longer. So in order to mate it up with, let's say, a LS1 or an LS6 clutch, you'll need a spacer. That's about it. And then once you space that out, the clutch lines need a little clearancing over on the holes. So these holes will need to be brought out a little bit, but other than that, it's fine. So with this, you add a little bit of length, but not too much. So anyway, moving on, there's a Corvette tail housing. This is from a C5. I'll go into those a little bit later, but this is what I call the small bolt pattern Corvette tail housing. They have the larger ones. I'll call those the large bolt pattern or TR6060, but you can use those. I've seen another conversion where they have these wings that stick out here, and you can see how that runs into where the front drive shaft would go. So they have some drawbacks, but if that's pretty much your option, if you're using a later transmission like the TR6060s, so it's not a big deal, but for me, this is what worked out for me. Next down the line is a custom plate that I made, which pretty much makes this whole setup work. This plate is an inch thick, and when it's all said and done, the main shaft will have a few inches cut off the end of it, so it'll fit into the transfer case without bottoming out on the main shaft. I'll get into the main shaft as well, but then there's the transfer case adapter and the transfer case. So these are out of a Chevy Astro. This adapter I think is off of probably an S10, but whatever you get the transfer case out of, this adapter should go along with it. I think this transfer case was only used on the 4L60 automatic transmission, so it has the 4-bolt pattern. And I'll show you more on that, but this is a BorgWarner 4472, 71. It says it over here somewhere. But it's essentially the same as what's in a Typhoon or a Cyclone, and so that's what kind of gave the idea here. So this is the custom adapter here. This is the bolt pattern for the Corvette tail housing, and then these are the bolts that made up to the transfer case adapter. They go all the way through out to, I guess, almost the mounting flange here. So this is a typical flange and bolt pattern for a 700 R4. I think the early 4L60s were the same, but the 4L60Es have like a 6-bolt pattern, and I think it's pretty close to where these holes go. So this hole, if you clock them a little bit, then you'd have maybe some freedom, but that's the reason why I went with this style of transfer case adapter. I also went with this particular one because it was shorter. Some of these transfer case adapters are pretty long, and they have like little legs that stick off the bottom. So given my application, I didn't want anything that was too long or stuck out too far on the bottom, because I'd just end up cutting that off anyway. This is the front drive shaft. I will probably have to lengthen it. I'm putting this in an S10 four-wheel drive, so I'm going to imagine that this transmission is probably longer than the NV3500 that's in there now. But, so this is the part that mates with the Corvette tail housing, and then here's the Corvette tail housing. It's pretty much a mirror image. Tail housing selection. So this one on the right is the tail housing from the CTSV. So basically everything inside here is what I had to match up with on the tail housing for the Corvette. And then this is a tail housing I purchased but didn't end up using. This is what I would call a TR6060 tail housing for the Corvette. This has these large wings that I talked about. I think this is the one that gets cut off. You don't really need it. But I just ended up not using this. So to compare these two, they're nearly the same. Most tail housings at this point will be nearly the same. The one thing that you got to watch out for is this bore right here. This is where the cluster gear shaft goes, and it was a two-piece design on the earlier transmissions. So the bearing that goes in here is a different size than the one that goes in here. I looked at it. There was possibility to machine it and then add a spacer, but at the end I just went with the C5 style tail housing, and that ended up being a much better choice for me. But if you can't find it, you may be able to use this. So what you have to do is you actually have to machine the diameter of this larger and then put a spacer on the bottom. It's not exactly something I would prefer to do, but if I was forced to do that, I wouldn't really feel like it was the worst thing in the world. So this is the two tail housings, and so yeah, again, this one CTSV, older style T56, and it has no snap ring in there. And then the TR6060 has a snap ring groove there. The board just looks differently too. So if you study images online, you can kind of see the difference between that and that. Main shafts. So this is the GTO main shaft. That's one of the critical components that makes it all work. This is the CTSV main shaft. Actually, this one's pretty interesting because on this you can see some wear, and on the T56s, if you get some I think it's like fourth or fifth gear vibration, it's usually attributed to the gear that fits on here. And I think it's a fourth and fifth, cluster, they're pressed on and they're together. And if you get some vibration, it's actually wear here. I think the only thing you can do is replace the main shaft and that gear. So getting a new shaft here is actually just another part of rejuvenating the transmission that I would do anyway. But I'm not showing you what it looks like compared to a Corvette tail shaft, or a main shaft. But essentially what you're going to have to do is just cut off right there, and then that's going to be the amount that sticks in the transfer case. So this is the adapter. Again, this is the missing link that makes it all work. So, and here's the bore for the transfer case adapter with these 4 bolt holes. And then this bore, this larger one, is for the C5 transmission housing, tail housing. And then these are the bolt patterns. It's pretty, I mean, I drew one up for the TR6060 style, so I have one that should work for that too. The bore for that is different. I forget if it's larger or smaller, but this worked out. These holes are really close to the edge, but they worked out. And then on the other side, there's just a pocket for the nut that goes on to the end of the on the end of the stud that on the C5 tail housing. So that's it. That's all these pieces come together and they'll make an all-wheel drive S10 someday. If you guys need one of these adapter plates for your build, I can make you one of the ones that I have. I do have a design for the wider flange TR6060, and then you can adapt a lot of transfer cases to this adapter with the 4-bolt pattern. You can get, so this is the 5-bolt pattern transfer case adapter. You can get the 6-bolt ones. So the NV149 I think is a 6-bolt, or some of the truck transfer cases are like the full-size truck transfer cases are 6-bolt. And then if you wanted to use those, you'd have the option to get the 32 spline main shaft. The main shaft for that requires a little bit of extra work. I'm not necessarily a transmission guy, but those are supposed to be the strongest ones. That would also work for like I guess a T56 Magnum. Those should have the one-piece cluster gear that would kind of push you into the larger bolt, the larger flange Corvette tail housing. But this principle should work for all of them. I don't know. Let me know if you need one. So far, I'm just sort of focused on this one right now and getting it to work with mine. But I mean, I could pop out probably a couple of these pretty easily. Just let me know.